You're now listening to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast, the ultimate insider's guide for all things ocean shipping. Presented by NiShacks.
Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast. I'm your co-host, Caroline Weaver, and not with me right now today is Lars Jensen. He's quite an adventurous spirit. He was doing a hike on Mount Kilimanjaro. We're going to record today. He is in a country called Comoros off the eastern coast of Africa. Wi-Fi is a little spotty there. We did meet up trying to record this episode, but it was a bit tough. So what we instead opted to do was ask for Lars to record an audio version of his updates. So we're going to include that after this intro here. So stay tuned to listen to this week's latest freight news.
It's great to be back down from Kilimanjaro. In case anybody out there wants to get away from the grindstone and get some time away from internet and emails, definitely thoroughly recommendable. Made it to the top of Africa, safely back down again. Wonderful trip and a nice digital detox. But now back from the mountain, it's time to again look at where has the markets developed. And basically, when we start to look at rate developments, it's almost business as usual. If we look at the Asia-Europe trade, rates continue to seep, which is basically still in line with, as we had discussed before, the end of the peak season approaching. The more troublesome aspect here is the Trans-Pacific trade. Trans-Pacific rates, both quoted rates from, for example, SCFI, but also the actual paid spot rates as measured by the NiFi, continue inexorably downwards, as they have here for months as it is now. The carriers have attempted multiple times over the last few months to institutionalize some rate increases. Typically, they're announcing $1,000, $2,000, or $3,000 per 40-foot. None of that has stuck so far. They're trying again here as of September 1st. The concerning part here is basically twofold. One is spot rates are now getting to a level where it's basically becoming unsustainable. And based on past history, we know, of course, that carriers can for a while continue to lower rates also at unsustainable levels, but eventually something always gives, and that something always tends to be a sudden termination of services. So if this continues, shippers should brace themselves for the beginning, blanking, or termination of more services in the short to medium term. The other concerning element here is, as we have also spoken about on the podcast on a few occasions, we are approaching a hard limit here. U.S. importers that want cargo moved on the Trans-Pacific and make it onto the shelves in time for holiday season. This is crunch time. This has to be booked and begin to be shipped in the next few weeks. And the continuing erosion of both paid and quoted spot rates seems to indicate that importers are in no hurry to do such things. So we seem to be heading towards a really problematic couple of months now on the Pacific in terms of potential upheaval. Now, upheaval comes in many guises. Let's take the one that we have spoken about so many times first, the tariffs. There are more potential trouble on the horizon with tariffs, not only the tariffs that we have already seen. We have seen veiled threats from the U.S. government to potentially retaliate against countries, and retaliation here has the flavor of tariffs. If other countries decide to vote for the basic CO2 tax on marine fossil fuels when the MEPC meeting is coming up. There has also been other veiled threats in terms of punishing countries that are buying, for example, Russian oil, as India has already felt to its dismay. And the new bombshell that came here in the past week is the 50-day deadline on a report looking at potentially also placing specific tariffs on furniture import. From a container market perspective, placing it on furniture import will likely have a very significant effect, at least at the tariffs are of the magnitude that we have seen on, for example, also other commodities like steel, aluminum, cars, what have you. If you look at second quarter this year alone, about 800,000 TEU were imported just with the two largest commodity components of furniture. That means about 7% of all containerized imports into the US were furniture by volume. This tends to be skewed more towards the Pacific. It's not unreasonable to expect something like at least 10% of volumes on the Pacific of furniture. So if furniture is suddenly at the 50-day deadline, that brings us to mid-October. If we from mid-October suddenly see a drastic ramp up of tariffs on furniture, this could have a very profound negative impact on demand flows. If at the same time we have seen, as we see it now, spot rates continue to decline, this basically puts in place a cocktail where we should certainly plan for a lot of service cancellations. Service cancellations are a potential problem from another perspective as well. We all know that in October, the USTR fees, also known as the $1 million fees on Chinese ships, are coming into play. Several things also emerged here over the last few days and the last week. One of them fully expected, and we should expect to see a lot more. Premier Alliance is now readjusting one of their services, basically splitting one service into two. And in the process, it appears that they will now make sure that there's about just short of a dozen Chinese-built vessels that will then no longer be calling the US. Other vessels will be doing that. We should expect a lot more of that. We've spoken about this on the podcast before. We're now beginning slowly to see that unfold as the alliances will modify their networks to make sure as few Chinese ships as possible make it onto the US shores. This will make service delivery more problematic, more unpredictable. We also saw a statement in the past week from OOCL, which of course is a subsidiary also of COSCO, where they acknowledged that this will have significant costs specifically for COSCO. And here's the problem. COSCO and OOCL are of course impacted on every single vessel they operate, simply by virtue of them being Chinese operators. There are specific fees for Chinese operators. And this problem cannot be seen as confined purely to COSCO and OOCL. They are, of course, an integral part of the Ocean Alliance network, together with CMA CGM and with Evergreen. So we should also expect significant changes. We already a couple of weeks ago saw a new service set up that goes from China basically directly only to the Mexican west coast, and it does not call the US. We should expect more of this, and if, as we talked about in the beginning, we see a demand deterioration in the beginning parts, or rather when we come into October, then it stands to reason that the first Ocean Alliance services that might be cut would likely be the ones that are actually operated by COSCO or OOCL in order to limit the exposure from Ocean Alliance towards the USTR fees. But this is an unfolding element, and more changes are bound to happen. Then I want to add a comment on something that's actually not containerized at all. It's the de minimis regulation, where there used to be a rule for small parcels that you were flying in. If it had commercial value below $800, it would be exempt from import tariffs. That's, of course, no longer the case, with new rules coming fast and furious, ramping this up. We've already, I think, on the podcast earlier discussed the weird quirk that whether to pay a percentage or a flat fee is a choice made by the transportation provider, not by customs, not by the customer. That in itself is weird. There's a lot more details that are now coming out, which is leading most of the larger logistics providers and increasingly also postal service operators around the world to basically throw in the towel. Many of them are now stating that for now, they will simply not accept small commercial parcels by air freight to the US. They're just shutting down service. That is, of course, one way of reacting to an extremely tumultuous regulatory environment as well. How they're going to deal with this one going forward? Well, likely a lot of these logistics companies and postal providers, they are taking stock of what is this new regulatory environment. How can they set up processes, administrative systems to make sure that this can actually work in practice? So at some point in time, I have no doubt that we will see a resumption of the air freight of small parcels also into the US, but of course at much higher cost levels than we've been used to, simply because there's more administrative burden. I mentioned this is, of course, not for containerized shipments, but what it does is, again, it shows unintended consequences. So far, container shipping operators and shippers and freight forwarders involved in container shipping have been enormously flexible, have been very resilient in the face of constant regulatory change. We have not seen services completely shut down. We have not seen massive bottlenecks. This has actually been handled extraordinarily well, considering the major continuing changes in the regulatory environment. But what we're seeing unfold on air freight on the de minimis now is potentially also an early warning that logistics change have a breaking point. At some point in time, if this becomes sufficiently onerous, some will simply say enough is enough, pull back for a while, and take stock of what's happening. We're not there yet on container shipping, but given the unpredictable environment of the last 6 months, we also cannot rule out that sudden unintended consequences might be coming to container shipping as well. Whilst we were on the topic of talking about spot rates, we have, of course, covered this multiple times on the podcast. There are different types of spot rate indices. There are the ones that are based on quotes. There are the ones that are based purely on contracts. There are the ones that, in this case, for example, the NIFI, which is based on actual paid spot rates, all have their different uses, all have their different ways of methodology. And what we always see also with indices is, and this actually goes back to a lot of the different indices if you look back in history, usually they're launched for a trial period first in order to have users try them out. Then feedback is gathered, say, should there be some minor adjustments to methodology? And usually that is the case. The oldest of the spot rate indices, the SCFI, for example, had such a trial period in 2009 before going fully live. And now coming full circle, this is also what happened over the last week to the NIFI index. The NIFI index was also launched in a very clearly stated trial period, and now there has been some minor modifications to the methodology. Actually, it hasn't changed the overall gist of what has happened here in the last many months when we've been commenting on it. It's more minor changes to make the index even more stable going forward. That, of course, also means it's now out of trial period, and there will be no further such revisions going forward. The final thing I want to mention, just in case anybody would wonder why we don't mention it, because it's just so visual and graphic, unfortunately. Yesterday, on Monday, there was a major fire that erupted in a warehouse in the port of Hamburg. Apparently, a car caught fire in a warehouse. The fire spread. There were larger explosions, and there was burning debris coming down on the major highway connecting the port and the major road systems. This means that shippers using Hamburg, unfortunately, they've already been used to bottleneck problems in ports like Hamburg over the past few months. This is not helping, to put it mildly. The sad news is that there's been multiple people apparently that has been injured as a result of the fire and the explosion. As of right now, as far as I'm aware, fortunately no fatalities though. The operations of container vessels in the port of Hamburg, which is a major node, as far as I'm aware, were not really affected. The problem is the access road to and from the port was shut down for a while. So even though vessels could be operated, inland logistics are likely to then suffer more bottlenecks and more delays, which comes on top of a European port environment where bottlenecks has been par for the course for the past many months, and sadly, there appears to be no short-term solution to that. Overall, if we look at it, I mean, I was off-grid for about a week or so, climbing a mountain, coming back down. It's one of these things where basically the world hasn't changed. Sure, there's a lot of smaller tactical changes. Rates have indeed changed. We are seeing changes on networks, all the elements we've talked about here, but fundamentally, the world is still going in the same direction, with peak season slowly being over, with constant changes in U.S. regulatory environment, making it exceedingly difficult to predict demand. But for now, it appears that U.S. importers are still playing it extraordinarily safe and are not really ramping up volumes. So we should brace for a significant decline in demand also going forward, especially on U.S. trades. With that, let's hope that for the podcast next week, we can have some more optimistic and good news. Until then, thank you, everyone.
All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in this week. I appreciate your patience as we navigate trying to record an international podcast and keeping up with Lars, the world traveler. We should be back on schedule next week, recording on Monday morning. So expect business as usual next week. Until then, I hope you all have an awesome week and stay tuned.
Thanks for listening to Supply Chain Secrets Podcast, presented by Nice Shacks. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Want to be a part of the show? Register to attend a live recording at the link below.